as well.
Yes, hi. So my name is Alette Fleischer. I'm an independent scholar. I have completed my dissertation 14 years ago on the history of science and technology. And I have looking at gardens from a scientific and technological viewpoint. And one of the things is how gardening enables you to understand nature better, but also enables you to change and manipulate nature to make nature more beautiful and to become closer to God and all that. Any case, and I one of the research I did was on water and water maintaining and management. And I stole this title, Pump and Circumstance, from Simon Scheffer, who is a historian of science in Oxford, no, sorry, Cambridge. Anyway, so my talk is going to be a little bit overlapping Renske, but we talked about that, how not to get into each other's ways. And my setup of this webinar is, are we talking about the waters at Versailles and Het Loo? And I'm going to talk about the science of water because it was a whole scientific approach to fountains, fountaineering, and hydraulics. And the pumps and the circumstance that were part of creating all those fantastic waterworks. So firstly, Versailles started, it was the first very small castle founded by Louis XIII, and Louis XIV decided to develop this castle and the areas around it. And you can see from this bird's eye view that the garden seems to go on all the way in the distance. And it was for Louis XIV also a way that to show his audience, all the noblemen, that he was the king of everything, the king of his people. He was the ruler over land, and he was the ruler over nature. He could manipulate nature to the greatest extent. Problem was, as you probably know, Versailles is very, very soggy, and there's very limited water sources to put all that water, available water for the fountains. He had to come up with a plan. Luckily, he has founded earlier the Académie Royale des Sciences, the scientific society, and one of the key players there was the Dutch Christian Huygens, Christian Huygens, the guy who invented the pendulum clock. And so he had all his engineers come up with a plan to get all that water to Versailles. And this image shows you as if the fountains can all work at the same time. And there were 2,400 fountains, 55 ponds, basins, and using up to 3,600 cubic meters water per hour, which is too much for that area to handle. So what he did, in fact, when he was walking with important guests through the garden, through the bosquets, he had his fountaineers walk up and down in front and behind him to open and close faucets so that only that particular fountain would be spouting, but you have the idea that all the fountains were spouting at the same time. So that was part of that water, presenting of water in his garden. And he had to find water coming from left, right, and center, creating aqueducts, creating étangs, which are like man-made reservoirs, and tapping on the waters from La Bièvre, Yvelines, and hidden behind my here. Also, of course, ultimately, all the way from the Seine at Marly-le-Roi to get the water over all kinds of barriers and hills to get that water to Versailles. It was one big showcase of Louis controlling nature. In the meantime, a little later, William the Third first stadhouder, but then later King William and his Queen Mary, tried to achieve the same thing at Het Loo. And here too, you see that long central axis of Willem's dominion over land and over nature. But of course, in the Netherlands, Willem had a bit of a different situation. He was not a king here. He was just a stadholder. And although he was a noble prince, he was not the ruler over the people and the land. But he tried to sort of evoke that ruler type display with his ornaments and the water and the landscape. And he knew that he could outshine Louis XIV because he chose his, as Renske already said, the site of Het Loo was very well chosen. It is a lower point with, and you can see that, hills in the area, elevation. So he had firmer soil, no soggy soil like Versailles. It was sand, and there were plenty of natural springs in the area that Willem had purchased. So indeed, some of the water was taken from its useful purpose of serving to pump water for mills, but he used all that water to put into his garden using the tubes, as Renske has explained. He had 20 fountains with ongoing water jets. And that was every visitor to Het Loo was writing home about. Always a constant flow of fresh water, water that looked good, tasted good, and smelled fresh rather than dirty water and mucky water, thanks to all the natural springs. And because there was the use of the elevation, yes, the water could bubble up constantly. In the area there are the springs, the Concordia springs and other springs that will then tap the water to water basins just north of the garden, and that would all help to bring the water into the garden. So he made use of that. Now, of course, the problem with Versailles is how to get all that water. And the scientists of the Académie Royale des Sciences, consisting not only of scientists but also engineers, said that we have to use the science of water and mathematics to get all that water into the garden of our great king. And the water jets need the assistance of geometry and machines to get the water pumped up. So it is about science and technology working hand in hand to get his garden up and running. And here we have a viewpoint over the area with, in front of you, the basins that were constructed. The basins are still there at Montboron, and to get the water ready for the Versailles Gardens. And one of the books published on garden theory is by Desailliers d'Argenville, who writes about that you can use the higher basins to get the water go up. And they knew already from the Greek mathematicians how water pressure would work. But then you have to calculate the slope, and for that you need to invent certain techniques. In Het Loo, there was another water source with the use of elevation that enabled our king's fountain to spout so high. And it starts at your left-hand side of the slide at Pomphul, that was 80 meters above NAP, and there was water coming in via the Veentjes, Haslo, another source, the Ruudbron, and wells to bring it down to 40 meters NAP, and then, hey presto, into the King's Fountain. and indeed with ceramic pipes and lead lining and all the workers that Renske talked about to keep the water flow constantly. In Versailles, also these waterworks were created with water reservoirs and also the use of windmills. Here you can just see a couple of windmills at the Étang de Clancy. And because what Louis XIV wanted so desperately to keep all that water where it was. So what he did was create windmills to keep the water go circular. So you don't lose the water, you keep it. So you make the water go back into the reservoir so you would have a constant flow. The problem was water could get dirty, green, and smelly. So that was a bit of a downfall. The same Desailliers d'Argenville also wrote about instruments and waterworks to get that water going on. And he even has, on the right-hand side of your slide, come up with all kinds of equipments, how to get water up, down, and then up again. So this was really high-end mathematics to get this all working. And part and parcel of calibrating the slope and the elevation up and down were these kind of automatic water leveling instruments. And Christian Huygens, our mathematician working for the French king, came up with this invention, the automatic water level instrument. And it's a kind of a pendulum instrument with a viewer with lenses. So you could calibrate the decline over a couple of a longer stretch than if you would not have a lens in the tube. And it was always, a bit of a delicate instrument because wind could easily take hold of the swing and then your whole measurement will go down the drain. Another man, Willem Meester, working for our Willem III, came up with also a device to calculate the level of the land. And his invention did not have a lens, but just a tube that you can go and look through, but it also rests in a basin of liquid to get the calculation right. And he wrote his pamphlet in French because he wanted his instrument to be sold to the court of Louis XIV. But Christian Huygens said to the King of France, "Oh, that invention is absolutely no good. You have to choose mine because mine comes with a lens." Poor Willem Meester, who was actually also an engineer and the inventor of the automatic bomb boat. Now, the big thing for Louis XIV was creating the machine de Marly to get the water from the Seine over the hill to his garden. And you can see in this image of the aqueduct that is part of the machine de Marly, a guy sitting there in the center, looking through such a water level instrument to calibrate the slope of the terrain. And of all the pump and circumstance, this is the pump of all pumps, an incredibly costly machine to get the water pumped high. And if you look at those wheels, they look like the wheels of that old water pump that Renske showed us at the beginning of this talk. And so here, this water needs to be pumped up in all kinds of phases over the hill to the Versailles Gardens. But pumps also in the Netherlands still play an important part, not per se in Het Loo because it has a natural decline, but for the Prince of Orange, for the Honselaarsdijk Palace, that needed pumps. And Christian Huygens wrote to his brother, Louis, that this type of a punk, and you can see this sketch in his letter, maybe something for the Prince of Orange's garden at Onslaarsdijk. And if he wants to know more about it, I will make a better drawing and a better description. So Huygens here is looking at French pumps as, you know, if it's something also for the Prince of Orange. And he also looked at a garden close by, and where he mentions this machine, this water pump of Monsieur Francine, an Italian engineer. And he said, well, the gardens are so-so, but this is going to make a water jet twice as high and at a constant height. So this permanent water flow and the height was absolutely something to write home about. And of course, Lennik also already said it, the garden spring, the fountain, the King's Fountain, 13 meters high, was indeed the winner of this peeing contest. And Edward Southwell wrote that this water throws up water 15 feet high, and the beauty of it may be estimated by a chart which some talk is near to be 30,000 pounds. And most of the water is brought at great expense 5 miles from this place. And Southwell also estimate that the total maintenance of these waterworks of Paleis Het Loo estimate around the 200,000 pound mark, which is a whopping amount of money just to get your fountains working. So controlling the water is also a way for a ruler, a monarch, to control nature, to govern, and it shows your power. And Louis XIV apparently has said that the only true rival in Europe for him was William of Orange. In order to get the water in your garden working, machines, pumps, and land surveying instruments were developed. So not for the use of your land itself, but for your garden. And only thanks to science and mathematics, water and nature will behave orderly and can be beautiful. And yes, the pumps for Louis XIV, William here at Paleis Het Loo had the benefit of the natural water pressure. And for that, I'd like to say thank you so much, and I'll be waiting for your questions later on. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Alette. It's so nice to be aware of all those very tactical new inventions specially made for these gardens and for this hunger to conquer and govern nature.